we have a small display in our museum around the Nisenan and the Stone Corral, which used to be a site for the Nisenan in our area. So we're excited to have Kaitlin come and share what they have on their culture and pathways. So with that, let me everybody welcome Kaitlin.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me tonight. I will also try to talk slowly. I've had caffeine and I'm a little nervous, both of which make me talk fast. So if I need to slow down, just go ahead and let me know. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about Nisenan culture of contemporary history as well for the Nisenan people. So let's get started. I'm going to start my timer. All right. So first of all, let's do a land acknowledgement here. We are on the Nisenan homeland here. Their territory extends up into Khyber's and down to the Sacramento Valley to the confluence of the Sacramento and American rivers, and all the way up to Nevada City and Gold River and over to the Cosumnes River as well. So that is their traditional homeland. There are 150 federally recognized tribes in California, and this number that I just mentioned does not include those that are unrecognized, which is even more. But I work at, and we are called, the Maidu Museum and Historic Site. So you may have heard me say both Nisenan and Maidu. I'll explain that first. Maidu is considered by anthropologists to be an umbrella term for a language group. Under that language group, there are 3 or 4 different sister tribes. These are the Nisenan, who live in this area, the Concow, which is out near like the Chico area, and then the Mountain Maidu, which is more the Lassen, Orangevale area. In Nisenan, Maidu just means man. Basically, someone walked up to a Nisenan person and was like, "Who are you?" And they're like, "I'm a man." But the name that the people call themselves is Nisenan or Nisenan, depending on where you are in their regions. And Nisenan means from our side of the river. So, like I said, Roseville and Orangevale are considered part of the Nisenan homeland. Oh, yes, and there's the museum. We're in Roseville. We'll talk more about that at the end. If we can save them for the end, that would be great, and then I can get everyone at once. So, first of all, people have lived in California since time immemorial. Settlements and villages were most often along rivers and streams and other waterways, because water is essential to life. Not only does it provide food and water, and in California, the waterways were extremely important. There was a time even about 200 years ago or so, the Sacramento River would flood every year. It's now changed because of agriculture and stuff like that. But you were able to sail a large boat all the way from San Francisco up the Sacramento River because it was such a big river. So it was a very important thing for all of the different tribes that lived along that area. So the people live with and in and on the land. One way to keep the land healthy is through cultural burning, which is pictured here, which is a practice that's still used today. The environment was carefully cultivated to benefit the plants, the animals, and the people. Fire gets rid of small weeds and trees that crowd the already healthy plants. It makes seeds and other animals also easier to find. It puts nitrogen back into the soil, which helps the plants to grow a lot better. And certain plants even require fire to grow properly and to spread their seeds. Like the Inuit in Alaska, they have many words for snow. Native Californians have many different words for fire. Fire was extensively used throughout California as a way to keep the land healthy. So you also never take more than you need. Good fishing practices lead to healthy rivers and salmon runs. Burning of grasslands helps them to get food easier as well. Thinned out forests also made hunting easier. So you can kind of think of it like, if you look back at the different things that people wrote about California when settlers first came to California, they describe it as park-like. In our definitions today, parks are very much curated spaces. There's a lot of maintenance that goes into a park. And that is the same way that the indigenous people of this land treated it. It was very much a part of them, and they were a part of it. Or R. Okay, so the land provided food, medicine, and tools. So you may have heard the term hunter-gatherer before. Have you guys heard the term hunter-gatherer before? So that term is outdated and a little bit inaccurate. Hunting was definitely happened, was only successful around 30% of the time or so. So the majority of your food consumption came from gathering. And even gathering there's so much more to it than just gathering. People went out and knew the places where certain plants that they needed were, whether that was for medicine, for basketry, for, you're not just randomly searching through the forest. You know where those things are. You have cultivated those plants and helped them to propagate and grow. So you know exactly where they are and you know how to harvest them and when. These plants were tended to help them to grow healthy and strong and keep providing their gifts for the people. So for instance, you have the California rose hips right over here on the top left. Those are high in vitamin C and they are used to make a tea, or you can also just eat them. On the top right, you have the gray pine cone. Pine nuts, which grow inside the pine cone, the fat on the inside, and that's better than an avocado in terms of fat and protein that it'll give you. Those pine nuts were also made into jewelry and could be a symbol of wealth. The elderberry, which is, can you see this? No, you can't. Okay, so the bottom left here, that's an elderberry tree, has beautiful big blue berries. The berries were eaten. Wood is used to carry embers for an easy fire start as well, and they were also used to make different instruments like clapper sticks and flutes. They also have a hard exterior and a soft interior in the wood, so that could be easily carved out and used to make those flutes and clapper sticks. There are grapes that are native to California. The grapes could be eaten, obviously. I have eaten one before. They are mostly seed, but when you get into the flesh, it's actually really, really nice. The leaves from the branches were also used to line leaching basins when you were making acorn flour, so that the flour didn't go all the way into the sand. And the vines could be used as rope. And that's just a few examples of the many different uses for a lot of different plants. Basically, every native plant had multiple uses, whether that was for food or for basketry or for medicine, and people knew that information intimately so that they could live here and thrive. Okay, so one of the most important plants that we're talking about is acorn. Acorn, things made from acorn, made up about 70. Oaks had to be well taken care of. Most of the oak trees that we see today are growing too close together, and that's partially what fire was used for, was to make sure that the oak trees had enough room to grow and spread. So you wouldn't have all the tiny little ones that come up from the acorns that are left. You usually have huge heritage oaks that could be owned by one family or by one group. It just depended on where you were. And everyone helped to gather those acorns. Oak trees only produce acorns about once every 2 years. Acorns in what year? Everybody in the family helped to gather those acorns. Most of the time, the men would have long poles and you would hit the branches with those long poles to make the acorns fall to the ground. The women and young women would have burden baskets that you could put the acorns into and put them out to dry. But then kids, probably around 8 or 9 years old, and maybe a little bit younger, would get to climb to the tops of the trees and shake them, which I think sounds like the most fun job. So one harvest would give hundreds of pounds of acorns from one tree in 1 year. And you have to make that last all year because they're not going to come back until the next fall. Acorn could be stored for years in granaries. It has a substance in it called tannic acid, which is a great preservative. And the acorns could last for up to 7 years or up to 10 years if they were kept dry and away from pests. So they're a great source of protein. Today, acorn is eaten during large gatherings and during holidays. Actually, if you have a chance to try acorn flour, it's actually pretty cool. It's a little bit sweet, and there's different ways that you can get that. Yes, so first of all, once after you gathered the acorns, once they've been dried, you have to pound them into a fine flour using the bedrock mortars like ones that you see here. or they're also called grinding holes. You'll find them all over this region. Usually, if you're finding acorn grinding holes or grinding holes in a place, that means you're probably near water or where there used to be water, and that was probably a village site as well. So yes, you have to use the pestle, that's the long rock that she's holding in her hands, and you have to pound that acorn into the fine flour. So then the flour has to be leached in order to remove the tannic acid. So made from acorn flour are 75% of your diet, you need to remove that tannic acid. It's very bitter. So you have to take your flour that you've pounded and made very smooth down to the river or to a place where there's flowing water. Usually what would happen is a woman would dig out a little basin next to the water where it was flowing. You would line that basin with grape leaves or pine needles depending on where you were. So further up into the mountains, you might line it with pine needles. Though some ladies were such experts at this task that they wouldn't line it at all. You would just be able to tell and not take up any sand when you were finished with it. So you would pour water over the flour that's in your little basin, and the water takes the tannic acid out. It just flows down into the sand and away. And you test when it's ready by tasting it. Some people like to leave a little bit of the tannic acid just because it makes it a little bit more bitter, but then some people like to take all of it out so it's a little bit more sweet. Just depends on your preference. So once you have your acorn flour ready to go, it can be made into all kinds of different things. These pictures are showing you a more traditional way of cooking the acorn flour. It can be made into a mush or like an oatmeal type of thing. But first, you have to think about this for a second. Around here, basketry is everything. In this area, there isn't a good source of clay. Like you hear of the Southwest, they're making pots out of clay to 7 years to make, depending on what type of basket it was and how tightly those baskets were woven, and depending on when your material was available. These baskets were woven tight enough, some of them were woven tight enough to hold water because that's how you carried water back on a fire, especially if it took 7 years to make. Let's not do that. So you're gonna put cooking stones into the fire. Those are a very specific type of rock that I'm not sure which one, and I'm not gonna say also because you usually don't wanna stick rocks in a fire because they'll explode. So you have to know which type of rock to do that with so that they don't explode. And then once it's nice and glowing hot, you take it out of the fire and set it in your basket and use that spoon that she has there to stir it around. Ladies, that was how you cooked, and it's actually, I've had acorn mush made this way and it's pretty good. Highly recommend going to a big time or a powwow where they're doing an acorn demonstration so you can taste it. It's pretty good. But yes. So, Nisenan people traditionally lived in villages with 20 to 100 individuals. In the background of this picture here, you can see the houses, which are called hu. They're basically an upside-down basket made with tule and willow. And here's a better example of one right here. So tule houses would usually house about 4 to 8 people. This is usually a summer house because usually during the winter, people would move from outer villages to a bigger main village where there was a roundhouse. So tule is a type of reed that doesn't grow around here anymore because it needs a lot of water, and unfortunately we don't have the water needs that it has here anymore. But it is an excellent reed and has a lot of air inside it, which means that it floats, so you can make boats out of it. It's also water resistant, which is why it was used for housing, because if it rained for a reason, it would flow off and the inside would stay dry. It was also very squishy, so it was used to make mats and sleeping mats and other clothing and things like that. Bedrock mortars or grinding holes that are near or in the village. Villages are also always built close to running water, like I said before. Okay, so the village that was located at the Maidu Museum and Historic Site also includes at least 1,000-year-old petroglyphs. We know we have at least 8 on site, but some of those may have been covered up through time. Their meaning has been lost to us, but that does not mean they weren't important to the people that carved them. petroglyphs, the carving in the rock takes a long time and takes effort, so we know that the person who did it or the people that did it wanted to express some sort of message to somebody. Okay. So in Nisenan, it was a communal space that also, that held, in addition to holding ceremonies, was also used as housing for unmarried men and used in education as well. Nisenan person through stories. So traditionally, a headman was the head of a tribe, and he was called a hook. That's the Nisenan word for a headman. They would make important decisions for the community, such as when to hunt, where to fish, where to hold celebrations and ceremony, and things like that. It was usually a man, but not always. If a woman was given the role, she was called a Maya. Though not necessarily a headman, but she could still hold an important role in the community. For instance, this man over here on the right is Tom Lewis. He was a headman, and his wife, Jane, we'll talk about her a little bit later, she's really cool. She was an elder in her community, though she was not a headman. But you can see the show of wealth that both of them are having. So Tom is wearing a rabbit blanket and a large abalone shell. So you can imagine the trade that it takes to get the abalone to here as well, as abalone only grow on the coast. Nisenan, the entirety of California, the different tribes, the 100 different tribes, were not isolated from each other. They were in constant communication and trading with each other to get what they needed. On Jane, you can see she's wearing clamshell beads, so that's a lot of wealth that she's wearing on her neck, as you can see. And she's also wearing a flicker band. Yeah. So, we're going to talk a little bit more moving into the history of the area, just because of their location. However, things really changed when John Sutter landed in California in August of 1839. He enslaved local Nisenan people to make the fort and to maintain it, as well as work on his farms and in other enterprises as well. That was for about 10 years, and then you have the gold rush in 1848. Gold was discovered at Coloma by John Marshall, and Coloma is actually the name of the Nisenan village that was there, that was pronounced Coloma. Yes, so the gold rush really was what devastated the Nisenan population. There was an American invasion and treatment, and there was a horrific treatment of indigenous people. Unsuccessful miners became farmers and forced Nisenan people off of their traditional lands and out of their villages. And altercations, overwhelming retaliation by the white settlers. Sometimes this resulted in a massacre of an entire village. And there was also an underground slavery network of Native children from the 1850s through a lot of that decade. So every tribe, this is rough. Every tribe in the United States has their own version of the Trail of Tears. For the Maidu, that is called the Nome Cult March, from August 28th to September 18th. U.S. cavalrymen forced 461 members of the Concow and other indigenous groups to march over 100 miles from Chico, California to the Round Valley Indian Reservation near Mendocino. Of the 461 who started the journey, only 277 arrived in Round Valley, and many elders and the injured were left behind during that march. So amidst this movement to rancherias and reservations, another tactic arose to prevent indigenous people from passing on their culture. And that was the boarding schools, which happened from the 1860s through the 1940s, and some into the 1970s. This was used for assimilation into American culture. The idea from the founder, the direct quote from the founders of some of the boarding schools, was to kill the Indian and save the man. This meant that children were removed from their families and communities. And when you learn how to be a Nisenan person by talking to your elders, by being around them and communicating with them, that was devastating heritage. And many children suffered emotional, mental, and physical abuse while at those schools. However, despite all of this, traditions have continued to survive through to today, in part because of elders and others that remember those traditions. One such person is Jane Lewis. So she was born in the village of Anape, which is where Indian Stone Corral is in Orangevale. So she's from the area. She was born in the 1840s. She remembered a lot of her life, and part of that was hiding from soldiers that came to remove her and her family from the area. But as an adult, Jane was an accomplished basket weaver and doctor, or a healer, for her community, as well as an honored elder. So she held on to a lot of these cultural traditions and passed those on to people that were with her. And she died in 1945 at the age of around 115 and operate. I love talking about Jane. I love her. Okay. Other ways that people continue to honor their traditions, culture, and ancestors is through reclaiming their past and traditions. This is a picture of, in 2013, the members of the Round Valley Indian tribes retraced the Concow Trail of Tears on its 150th anniversary. So they made that walk as a way. So, practice cultural tradition. It wasn't used for a long time because people were afraid of fire, but now we're realizing, especially in California, that hey, maybe we should return to some of these traditional ways so that we can protect ourselves in the future. Cultural burning is a growing part of forest management, and government agencies are beginning to work with tribes to return forests to a regular cycle of low-intensity burns, and that's how it works. There's some great articles coming out of, I believe, Karuk territory up in Northern California. They've been doing a lot of work with cultural burning. Highly recommend looking that up. That's K-A-R-U-K is Karuk. That's the people that I've seen a lot of articles about doing a lot of this work with the government. Yes. So cultural revival and continuation through classes and teaching and museum exhibits and events and outreach is all happening all over California. And ceremonies are still held. And you can usually, you can visit a powwow or a big time. That's what the California Indian word for a powwow is, a big time. Definitely visit one when you can, which is like the celebration of the coming out of the flowers, celebration of spring. So highly recommend checking any of those events out. So, and part of this continuation is where I work, the Maidu Museum and Historic Site. We strive to be a part of the continuation of culture and tradition, as well as spreading awareness about Indigenous peoples. The museum itself got its start through a man named Myron Zentz in the 1950s and 60s. He led school groups through the site because it was just basically an open field. It was a ranch at one point, like a turkey ranch at one point, and then it was kind of left in kind of disrepair, and this guy basically was like, hey, there's something cool here, I'm gonna lead school out there. So he fought to preserve the land from development, and in 1969 it was added to the National Historic Site list. And our first building, the Interpretive Center, was built in 2001, and then the building you see behind Petroglyphs, and at least 500 bedrock mortars or grinding holes, a native garden, and our creek. Now a little bit more about the 500 bedrock mortars. We think, but a lot of the times, in a bedrock mortar would be used by one woman over the course of her lifetime. At the end of her life, it was either passed on to her daughters, or sometimes it was destroyed depending on which region you were in, what traditions were there. So you can imagine with 500 being on site, you can see how many different generations of people have lived at the Maidu Museum and Historic Site where it is today. To spread awareness about these cultures and help people learn more about them. So there's a lot of different ways that we do that. And we're holding the site in trust for the Roseville community and for contemporary Nisenan people. Site to build traditional picture of the Who that you saw, that was built by a Native youth group. We also have exhibits on native plants and teach the public about Nisenan games as well. It's pretty fun. And we also lead a lot of the school tours on site, so everyone in the area can learn about it if they would like to. Yeah, so we do school tours, mostly for third graders, but that can range from preschool docents are in our education volunteer programs. If you guys are interested in leading tours for the museum, I'm the one that will teach you how to do it. So if you want to, I have my card. If you want to learn more about that. We also have opportunities for just weekend and evenings. Yes, I'm gonna skip that one. So, I just want to let you guys know about a couple of events coming up. We have our campfire events that happened on the second Friday of every month, April through October. We tell traditional Native American stories at this campfire, as well as roast marshmallows, so it's pretty fun. Just so to let you know, new docent training is on September 9th and 16th, if you'd like to come out and help us out. We're also having a native plant sale on October 21st and a native craft fair on November 4th. Highly recommend checking both of those out. And yeah. So that comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Tending the Wild. That is a documentary series that you can just look up, Tending the Wild KSET. It's like a PBS station. They have 20-minute episodes based on cultural burning, on salmon, on basketry. Highly recommend. They're great resources for you. So thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Yes. If you have any questions, please ask. Yes. So Lake Almanor is, I believe, a different part of this state, and then, yeah, so it's a little bit further west. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, there is. Yes, yes. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes.
What was the Native American presence like in this area, like when Europeans first came?
What was the Native American presence, like the population size?
Well,